Welcome back, everybody, to First Round Frenzy. Matt and Cole Noble here. We have just finished our positional rankings last week, and now we are getting into our top 50s. We're getting closer and closer to draft time. Today, how we're going to break this up, today we're going to do Cole Noble's uh, top 50. Thursday will be my top 50, and we'll kind of see, what the comparisons are between how we rank some of these players. So, Cole, how are you feeling? And what were you thinking about when you kind of compiled these rankings and how you valued some of these players?
I'm good. We're getting closer and closer. We had a good week of free agency, so it helped iron some things out. But putting this list together was tough. I mean, I was looking through some players you had and the differences we had, so it'll be interesting to get into it, especially, once we get to Thursday's show and unveil your list as well. The fans can see that and the differences we had, but it was a tough little group. I think we know it's strong at the defensive line. I got a lot of defensive linemen on my list. I think I had a lot of offensive linemen too that I'm pretty high on. I think more than the consensus as early into the first round, second round guys. So it's pretty fun trying to put this list together. I was going back and forth with certain players, and still this is going to change a lot between now and April, I think, in terms of how players shoot up the boards and what we hear about them now that teams are starting to iron out their draft plans.
Yeah, I can tell you from my list, there are a lot of people that were kind of just on the borderline, right? Four or five players that just kind of missed out and wanted to get in. But looking at your list, we've got edge rushers with 8 players in this list, offensive tackles with 7, and wide receivers with 6. That seems like your top three positional groups there for this top 50. What we're going to do, we're going to get right into this. We're going to go 50 to 41, 40 to 31, et cetera, et cetera. We'll do that all the way through. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Cole's top 50, starting with 50 to 41. And here is that list here. We've got Nick Scorton, edge rusher out of Texas A&M, 50. Jalen Knoll, wide receiver out of Iowa State, 49. Arante Ursary, offensive tackle out of Minnesota, 48. Travion Henderson, 47. Maxwell Harrison, 46. Carson Schlesinger, 45. Benjamin Morrison, 44. Mason Taylor, 43. Josh Connerly Jr., 42. And Trey Harris out of Ole Miss at 41. Cole, where do you want to get started?
I want to get started with the wide receivers on this one because I threw Trey Harris in. I didn't think he would make it in. And Jalen Noel, I just had to put in there late. I mean, Jalen Noel is one of my favorite players in this year's draft just because I love the size is what it is, but I think he answered some of those questions at the combine. But I love the footwork out of the slot. This guy is going to absolutely dominate some defensive backs trying to play him in man coverage, and he knows how to get open in space and zone. So I just could not do a list without Jalen Noel in there. But I was shocked. I mean, looking at it, like you said, with 6 wide receivers, even that I feel like is high in this class to have in my top 50. But look at the Trey Harris at 41 too. I just like the size, potential he has coming out of Old Miss. But then the tackles, Ariante Arasuri, Josh Connerly as well. Two guys I like that I had to put in this list. We'll see how this transpires because there are a lot of tackles, teams with tackle needs filled up, especially with these left tackle options in free agency. So we'll see what happens because there's a chance, Josh Connerly maybe squeaks into the first round. I liked Ariante Ursary. I had him penciled in to the Chiefs. And the Chiefs got their tackle in free agency with that guy from San Francisco as their new left tackle. So that changes some things, but they're still in here in my top 50 list. But Maxwell Harrison's the biggest jump. What we saw, that's why I have him highlighted from the combine. He is now on my list, and he's going to be quickly rising. You're going to see this guy over the next couple of weeks show up in some first round mocks. We're already starting to see that right now after his combine performance. I mean, ran a 4.28 on his second attempt. So he's already impressing the right people, made himself a lot of money at the combine, he was on a lot of all combine lists as the number one cornerback. Not saying he is in the class, but just from the combine performance, he looked really strong. And Carson Schlesinger as well. He wasn't even on my list of linebackers, if you remember. I had to pull up that
Yep.
list. I had him as an honorable mention, and now I have him at linebacker too. So I think he's potentially squeaking his way into that first round. I mean, the guy had over 100 tackles. He had, I think, 4 sacks, 3 interceptions. He was all over the field. The more I've looked into him, and what he showed at the combine, the more I'm seeing what everyone else is starting to see in that guy.
Yeah, and one thing that really stood out to me here when looking at your list, Travion Henderson, running back 5. So you have
Yeah,
5 running backs in your top 50. And I feel like one of the things we've talked about is how deep this class is. But, not many people are having more than 3, maybe 4 in their top 50. A lot of
yeah.
the range is kind of in that middle range from 40 to 75, right? That's where everybody's saying is like the heart of this draft. Why did you feel it that you needed to have him in there, had to have a fifth running back in this list?
Yeah, I think it just out of the fairness of how close that position is, especially these day two guys. I got two more on the next, I think, yeah, on the next list once we get to the 40s to 31. But uh, Travion Henderson just came in just short of those other guys, but they're right there, like kind of stacked. I put the one, I put one in, and I put the next one in, and I was like, okay, I gotta have the next Ohio State guy because they're all so close in my opinion. But we talked about it on the running back show. Travion, you'd like a little bit higher than Quinshawn. I had Quinshawn just a little bit higher on my list. We'll see in the next ranking grouping, but yeah, I think they're just so close. These second round running backs, they're going to be rated very differently in terms of different draft rankings and draft board rankings, but I think they're really close with these day 3 or 4 day two guys.
All right. One last thing. We don't need to go into too much detail here because I don't want to, you know, ruin the rest of your list here.
Yeah.
So you don't need to answer everything. But Nick Scorton at 50. I believe when we did the edge rusher list, you had him above his teammate Shamar Stewart. Obviously, he's not in this list. Is that still the case?
Uh,
Don't need to go
no, just
exactly where he is or if he's here, but
yeah, he
is
is a
that still
little
the case?
higher. I mean, the combine was electric and one of the best combine performances we've ever seen out of this position. So because of that, Shamar has jumped Nick Scourton.
Okay. So let us move on. Next up, we have 40 through 31. Walter Nolan at Ole Miss at 40. Mike Green, 39. Quinshon Judkins at 38, the other running back out of Ohio State. Luther Burden III, wide receiver out of Missouri at 37. Marcus Embo, interesting inclusion there at 36. Chavone Rebel Jr., the big corner out of ECU at 35. Caleb Johnson, another running back at 34. Matthew Golden, great combine out of Texas at 33. Donovan Ezeraku, one of my favorite edge rushers at 32. And Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle at 31. Cole, where do you want to get started here?
Yeah, I'll fix this. Walter Nolan. Apologies. But yeah, so I'll start with Walter Nolan. Feel like, at one point this guy was always in everyone's first round mocks, and for some reason he's the one that is losing the most steam out of anybody. Just the fact of like no one's talking about this guy anymore. After the combine, he was still the case. So him at 40, I still think he's a great player. But yeah, that's a crazy drop in my opinion, seeing that going from at one point everyone viewed him at right behind um, uh, Mason Graham as the number two defensive tackle. And then, he was right there with Kenneth Grant. So now we're seeing him. I have him at D tackle 5, which was a strikingly change in my opinion from how I listed this group a couple of weeks ago. But he's still a great talent. We'll see what teams value out of him. Mike Green, I would love to have him higher. I mean, the guy led the country in sacks this past year. I have him defensive end number 7, positional rank, and then overall rank 39. The off the field concerns, I don't think he fully answered those to really cross off those boxes at the combine, but still phenomenal talent. So we'll see how teams value that. Two more wide receivers on this one. Luther Burden, the third. I still like him above Trey Harris in terms of what he can do. And Matthew Golden, he's starting to rise up my list. Wide receiver 3 now. I know you love the guy, and I'm starting to see why after the combine. And everyone's saying he might be the first wide receiver off the board. We'll see. But yeah, Caleb Johnson's my spotlight player of this position group. I love what Caleb Johnson can do. The more I see out of him as a receiving back, the more I'm really buying into what he can do. Probably, if Amarian goes in the first round, Caleb Johnson's my favorite running back on day 2, above Quinshon Judkins, just because I think he is a more complete back than Quinshon. Once I'm getting more into that receiving game of what he can do, the pass protection's great, the vision. I think he was the one I compared. Let me see. No, he was not the one I compared to Najee Harris, but still, like I talked about. Oh, I think he was the one that was like David Montgomery because I said
Yes.
like this guy's gonna be a 10 touchdown player from day one in terms of what he can do with the finishing power. So he's my spotlight player. I have Amarian a little bit higher on the list, and of course he's my running back too behind Ashton Genty. But Caleb Johnson, he's going to be the top running back on day two, in my opinion, once Amarian potentially squeaks into that first round.
All right, so let's get into this a little bit. I believe in our wide receiver rankings, we'll start with this. You had Luther the Burden the third as your wide receiver three, and I believe you had Matthew Golden as your wide receiver five, if I remember correctly. So, what flipped that? Right? I mean, obviously they're right next to each other now. Matthew Golden obviously moved up two spots. Luther Burden moved down one spot. I'm going to get into the guy that you left off this list in a second, but what kind of changed that opinion of those two guys specifically?
Yeah, I mean Luther Burden, he's dynamic. I think he is going to do great out of the slot at the next level, but I think there's more that you can do with Matthew Golden. The more I look into it, the more I'm starting to get the idea of what people are liking out of this guy. And like I said, you've been on him for a while now. I'm trying to pull up my list. Um, There we go. So yeah, which is what he was able to do at the combine was a little bit better. I think he's more of an X wide receiver. Still not quite up to the level that we're going to see at the guy on top of being the X in this class. But I think he does a little bit more for your offense than Luther Burden. Luther Burden's gonna be great at what he does. Matthew Golden more interchangeably used within an offense based on what
Now,
I'm looking at.
sticking with that real quick, Jaden Higgins, believe you had him as wide receiver four in that list. Now he's not even on the list, and Jalen Knoll, his teammate, is. So
Yep.
what made Jaden Higgins drop so much? Because you had him rated above Trey Harris, who I'd say are probably a similar comparison in style of player. Big, bulky, X wide receiver style guy. Why is he no longer on the list, and why did he drop so much?
Yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, Jaden Higgins still had a good combine, 4.4, 740. He had a 39-inch vertical, 10.8 broad jump. I think, both players performed really well at the combine. And you're looking at those two Iowa State
Yep.
wide receivers, specifically Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. They both tested very well. And Noel, people are going to like Higgins over Noel because of the size. And Noel 5'10", 194 that he weighed in at. But a 41.5-inch vertical jump. He had a better broad jump. His 23 reps on the bench was insane for a 194-pound wide receiver. And just the footwork to me, like I was like, okay, if it's that similar for the testing and he's a smaller guy, and I like the footwork a lot better and him getting open and beating man coverage with the footwork, having the IQ of finding space in the open holes in the zone. I was already leaning this way before, and I just kind of want to make it official. Yeah, I do like Noel over Jaden Higgins. And I saw people saying like Jaden Higgins is like the Roman Wilson of this year's class, or like everyone typed him up as like in that tier ranking of a wide receiver group,
Yep.
and then you never heard his name again once he got to the Pittsburgh Steelers and um, after his rookie season was just never used. And I wonder if Higgins is going to potentially be that same way. But Noel, there's a lot to like out of his game and what he can do getting open in space.
I don't know if you scroll through Steelers Twitter, you hear Roman Wilson's name all the time. Not all. Real quick before we move on to that next list, one guy that I didn't have in my list at all, Marcus Embo. Right? You don't
Yep.
have him just on. You've got him in that second grouping here from 31 to 40. What do you like about him so much? You've got him as an offensive tackle, which means you have him above Connerly and Aronte Ursery, who some people have either of those in their top three offensive tackles. Marcus Embo, another guy that could play inside or outside. What do you like so much about him that he's up this high?
Yeah, I think the what you were just talking about, the multi-positional, he can play inside, he can play outside. I think I've been looking at him for a while. He's a guy, he's reminding me of a little bit of like what Armand and Mimbo can do. He can be a starter at right tackle or he can be a starter at right guard, either one. And I like just kind of those guys. He looked lean, running and moving around the athleticism. Just dropped my phone. But yeah, I like Imbo a lot. I think he's going to be the one that surprised a lot of people coming out of this class once he gets on the field. And I think he has the chance to be an impact starter at either position on that right side. The same with Imbo, and Imbo made a big jump for me as well. Mbo here, yes, but Armand Mimbo also had a big jump. We'll see him a lot higher on my list. But those two guys, the more I looked into them, the more I was like, okay, I see what everyone's going with here with both of these two guys.
All right, let's move on here. 30 to 21. And we have two of the three quarterbacks that you have in this list on this page. 30, Darius Alexander of Toledo. Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss at 29. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver 2 at number 28. Donovan Jackson, the offensive guard out of Ohio State at 27. Shedeur Sanders, 26 out of Colorado. Kenneth Grant kicks off the top 25. Ray Zabel is in the top 25 with Malachi Starks, James Pierce Jr., and Jahdae Barron at 21. Cole, let's start with quarterbacks, right? I think
Okay.
we haven't gotten into it too much. You've got Jackson Dart as your highlight player. You got them within 4 spots of each other, both just outside the top 25. We just had our quarterback positional rankings. What went into having both these quarterbacks in the top 30?
Yeah, I think both guys could potentially start out of the gate with whatever team drafts them. And I always said, from the beginning, it's not going to look like this come April, but I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that the gap between Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders is a lot closer than the gap between Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. So I think you might have Shedeur a little bit lower. We talked about in depth the difference between these, the debate between these two players and the debate between Shedeur and Cam Ward pretty heavily on our quarterback conversation. And I really enjoyed the conversation we had about all three guys and what each bring to the table in terms of being a franchise quarterback potentially for the team that goes with them. But Jackson Dart, he's right there. I mean, really want to put him above Shedeur Sanders, just talent wise of what he can do. The system still concerns me of Jackson Dart and being able to translate into a more pro offense and not the one read offense he ran at Ole Miss. And the thing with Shedeur, like I talked about, is the confidence. If a franchise believes that his confidence is worthy of, you know, swaying those decision makers, that he can, translate that confidence onto the field and be the savior of a franchise, you're going to see him as a top three pick. If he can't do that, and he's looked at that as, his arrogance, and, they look into it and say, okay, without his dad running the last two teams he's played on, what does that team look like with him at quarterback without Deion Sanders as head coach? And that might start having them slide down the board. We've seen them start going in the 20s lately on some mock drafts, especially with the quarterbacks and free agency finding new homes and still waiting on a couple others. And even at the time of this posting, we'll probably still be waiting on some of those other quarterbacks to find new homes. But I mean, that just shows you there's a lot of questions about Shedeur Sanders right now. And just what happens with these landing spots and, which quarterbacks get filled at which teams that need them.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I definitely have both of them a bit lower in my list, but also within 7 or I don't know the exact range, but they're within 10 picks of each other. So 10
Mhm.
spots of each other. So they're very close. Let's get into this. So, we talk about how a lot of people grade these guys on a round 1 grade, round 2 grade. You don't need to give me an exact number if you don't have it yet, but do any of these guys have round 1 grades? Right? Because we
Yeah.
talk about some people saying this isn't the deepest class for elite talent. Some people only have 13, 14, 15 first round grades. I think I have a little bit more than that. I'll talk about that in my list. But do any of these guys kind of fit that or in the conversation for round 1 grades?
So these ones that are on this list right
On
now.
this list right here, yeah.
Uh, Let me see. So I wouldn't say, I mean, Shedeur, you would want to put him in there, but I can't do it. Kenneth Grant, same way. I had him at D tackle 3, but he's really going to be in there. Donovan Jackson, I would love for him. I mean, the tape that he put out moving to left tackle was phenomenal this past season at Ohio State, and I would love him to be a top talent, but you're still seeing him in the second round too. Zabel, same way. So I'd say James Pierce out of this group. I mean, Jahdae Barron, I have him, ranked one spot above him, yes, on my positional ranking here or the overall ranking. But I think James Pierce, in terms of a first round grade, he is as clean of a prospect as you can see on the field. And I have him as defensive end 5, and it's crazy to me. I mean, just because of all that stuff we heard at the combine, I listened to it and it dropped my ranking. But this guy has the ability to be up there with Abdul Carter as the best pass rusher in this year's class, talent alone. And it's just whether or not he has that drive and the willingness to be great and all that, crap we're hearing at the combine that's dropping on everyone's list. But once we get to April and they start looking at this guy again and teams start realizing that you have to throw that stuff out of the window. You have to go with what can this guy do on the field, and that's be an impact player. And to me, that would give him a first round grade.
All right. And one more player that I want to get into before we move on to the next group, and that is Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia. I think a lot of people have been talking about these top two safeties. I think, based on this, Nick Emanwar is going to be above him. We'll see how much higher above him. What went into this placement of Malachi Starks? You know, were you comparing the two a lot, and this is just kind of where it came out, or were you just like, this is the perfect spot for him? This is kind of like where I see him talent wise.
Yeah, I think this is fair. I mean, it's top 25 for him. It's he still had a good combine, and the numbers weren't the numbers that Nick Emanori had, but what the drills showed, the on-field drills, that hey, this guy's a really good player at the end of the day, without those numerical numbers next to his name. And the thing that isn't showing up on those drills or in the numbers is I think this guy can change the culture of a defense. And, with his play style, with his leadership that he showed at Georgia over the last couple of years, I think that translates to the next level. So yeah, if the Philadelphia Eagles land this guy at 32, they're going to be to round out their Georgia Bulldog defense. That'd be great because he can lead that back end of that defense. So he's still up there as one of my top 25 players. But Nicky Manori, like what the tape showed, what the size is, officially, what the speed is officially, it had to move him higher. And I hate it because I love Malachi Starks for years now coming into this year's draft, but we're talking about a different kind of freak, in my opinion, of what Nicky Manori is starting to show to a lot of players or a lot
All
of
right.
scouts.
Let us hop in to the top 20. Here we go. You have the third and final quarterback in this list. At number 20, you got Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. 19, the other Texas A&M guy. He cracked the top 20, Shamar Stewart. Derek Harmon, a guy that we talked about a lot. You had a bit lower in your interior rankings at 18 now. Amarian Hampton in the top 20 at 17. Colson Loveland at 16. Two Michigan guys back-to-back here. Will Johnson cracks the top 15. Michael Williams, another guy that both of us had a bit lower in the rankings when we did that a few weeks ago at 14. Tedero McMillan, wide receiver 1 at 13. Tyler Booker at 12. And Cam Ward just outside the top 10. Quarterback 1 at number 11. Cole, where do you want to start here?
We can start with Josh Simmons, and number 20 on my list. I have him as offensive tackle 3, but I think if the medicals clear up in the next couple of weeks before his pro day, I'm fully and comfortable throwing him in as offensive tackle number 1 in this class. It seemed that way going into it. He seemed like a top 10 lock before that, patellar tendon injury he had. That was a significant injury that knocked him out the entire season. But if that medical clears up, and it's a tough injury to come back from and be the same player again, but if he can show that at the pro day that he has coming up, that's going to say a lot for his stock. So his stock's already rising for me. I have him as a top 20 player because I hope that is the case. And by the sounds of it, he's on track to be able to, fully go with no restrictions, which is incredible because we thought that injury would hold him out into the summer with whatever team takes a chance on him. So if we see him back in the top 15 category, top 20 category in the draft, I think that's great for him being able to prove himself once again as a top player in this year's class.
All right, let's move on to this defensive line group, right?
Okay.
Michael Williams, Derek Harmon, Shamar Stewart. 3 guys that you had much lower in each of your rankings back, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, whenever it was that we did those defensive line rankings. You had Derek Harmon, I believe, at defensive tackle 4 or 5. You had Shamar Stewart as edge 7. I believe you had Michael Williams at 6. Like, could be 1 or 2 positions off there with some of those guys, but you had them much lower, and now they're inside your top 5, inside your top 3 for Michael Williams and Derek Harmon. What has changed your mind about those 3 players?
Yeah. So first off, Shamar Stewart, the perfect 10, rare to see from a defensive end, RAS score at the combine. That has to jump him up. Say what you want about the production, the 4.5 sacks in 3 years or whatever it was. Like if the traits are there, the traits are there. And he's not his biggest supporter because of that. But when the consensus is starting to lean heavy in favoring this guy, You kind of just have to buy into it. And because, yeah, you love the traits that he can potentially do. And sacks aren't everything. There's defensive coordinators out there now that they'd say they don't care about the sacks. If you can get pressure and pressure turned into interceptions, that's better than a sack 9 times out of 10. Getting a turnover because of a pressure. And maybe that's what they think that they can do with Shamar Stewart. If you can't hit home, you can have other guys in the defense line at hit home. As long as you take some pressure away from an offensive front, toward his side, and he still is able to get after a quarterback, that's still worth it at the end of the day. And Derek Harmon, I think, was the one of the biggest winners of the combine, in my opinion. He shot up to my defensive tackle too. His 313 pounds. He ran a sub 540. He talked all about, competing, being a guy. He's still penciled in as my ideal guy for the Green Bay Packers. So because of that, I had to bump him up my list because of, I want him to come over to Green Bay. And Michael Williams, we didn't see him at the combine, really test and get on the field. We did see him at the pro day. I wasn't absolutely floored with what we saw, but I think he still proved, a little bit of what he needed to that he missed out on in Indianapolis. And the fact that he played a lot of that 2024 season injured and less than 60%, which is what he said on the podium at the combine, put it into perspective of, okay, yeah, this guy, we shouldn't be knocking his stock because of what we saw in 2024. The physical traits, again, are there with Michael Williams. He's a lengthy guy. He was a beast the year before in 2023. And if that's the guy he can be, then I would have no question taking him potentially in the top 15, maybe even top 10.
All right, before we get into Cam Ward, let's talk about the two Michigan guys, Will Johnson and Colson Loveland, both at 15 and 16. A lot of people have them in their top 10, right? We're seeing Colson Loveland 3 or 4 spots behind Tyler Warren, and we've got Will Johnson kind of in that bottom half of the top 10. I'm going to, just spoil a little bit. You've got Colson Loveland more than 10 spots behind Tyler Warren. What went into you dropping these guys outside of your top 10?
Yeah, Colson Loveland, I'll start with him. The lack of the inline ability. He's a big slot. But we just saw Mike Gesicki get a pretty decent amount of money as being a big slot, and he's made his whole career out of it. He's not an inline guy by any means, and Colson Loveland's a similar, basically a big X you throw into the slot, and you just constantly rack up production with him. I still think he has the ability to do that, but the difference between him and Tyler Warren, in my opinion, is I think Tyler Warren's just a more complete offensive weapon. You can move him anywhere. You can use him in the backfield, as a run blocker. You can use him in line as a run blocker or a pass blocker. You can slide him out and the slot just like you can with Colson Loveland and throw it to him as a big body over the middle. So I think there's just more to do with that. And we're seeing it a lot more now. Like Tyler Warren is creeping up as well into like top 10 categories. And I was like, wow, top 10 tight end. You weren't talking about him in that kind of trajectory just a couple months back, but now people are starting to see potentially that kind of translation in his game. And then Will Johnson, I'm just not overly floored with the cornerback class looking into it more. I always am a big component of every year you have to draft a corner. And even the late ones this year, I'm like, I'm not really finding ones I particularly like that I would take the swing on just to have a guy in the room that's young to develop. And the top end guys, I had Siobhan Revel on here, I had Jade Barron on here, and Will Johnson. I had Benjamin
Benjamin
Morrison.
Morrison, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So I saw a couple on there, but it's not like the top guys. Like I don't have them in the top tens. I don't have them in the top fives. I think that position this year is just a little bit lacking from the ones we've seen before, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the free agent corners get as much money as they did over the last couple of weeks.
All right, before we move on to the top 10, got to talk about QB1. Cam Ward, your highlight player. What kept him out of the top 10?
Yeah, I think there's still a couple of things he needs to work on. Ball protection, I talked about one. It was one diagnosing the advanced things in his game. I mean, if you're talking about a guy being the number one pick, you have to be absolutely sure that he is surefire the best player in this draft. And that's the conversations going on in Tennessee right now. It seems like they're willing to take that swing on Cam Ward with the moves they're making. They haven't brought in any competition in that quarterback room, veteran wise, for the most part. And with some of the options that were out there that they could have brought in. So it all points to Cam Ward potentially being that guy number one.
Let
But in
Mason
my opinion,
Rudolph walk too. So they only
yeah,
have Will Levis there.
yep. So it points to him being the number one pick. But in my opinion, I don't think that he's as polished as some number one pick quarterbacks we've seen in the past. It's more of just the need is really pressing for Tennessee to find their guy at that position long term. And I think Cam Ward can do it. I did say that I think he's the most pro-ready quarterback in the class and that he has the body of work to be a franchise guy. But I love all the guys in the top 10 I have above him just as a pure prospect standpoint.
All right, now what everybody's been waiting for, the top 10 players according to Cole Noble at this time. Two new inclusions, I believe, since the combine. Number 10, Armand Membu out of Missouri. Number 9, Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina. Now, one was really surprising to me, Mason Graham, all the way down at number 8 out of Michigan. Jihad Campbell, number 7. Will Campbell, number 6. Jalen Walker kicks off the top 5 out of Georgia. Ashton Genty at number 4. Tyler Warren, just talked about him a little bit. He's in the top 3. And then, of course, the top 2, you have it Travis Hunter at number 2. And Abdul Carter is the best player in the 2025 NFL draft, according to Cole Noble. Cole, let's just kind of go down the list here, right? Let's start with this bottom group: Nick Emanwari, Armand Membu. 2, I'm assuming new inclusion since the combine based on their performance there. What, makes them so good, according to you?
Armand Imbo, I think, is the top guy on the right side of the front. And depending on what you're looking for, we saw Darnell Wright as a true right tackle go a couple of years ago in the top 10. The guy, JC Latham, he was primarily a right tackle too, and he went top 10, and they moved him to the left side. And now we're seeing conversations about Armand Mimbo being a right tackle in his career. He has the ability to play right guard. Teams are questioning, does he have the ability to slide to the left side, like we saw with JC Latham, and be a left tackle? But in my opinion, from what we heard out of the combine and the measurements with Will Campbell, there's I think legitimate conversations of whether or not Armand Mimbo could be the top offensive lineman off the board, and I think they're warranted. I think after Campbell goes, I think right now Campbell still goes above Mimbo, but I think it's going to be like 1 or 2 picks later. Armand Mimbo's coming off the board. It's that close. And Kelvin Banks used to be that guy we talked about going into this one. It was Will Campbell and then Kelvin Banks. What's going to happen with their arm length? They seem to be right there as the best two protectors in this year's class. And Armand's just slowly but surely been chinking up that list. And now he's even threatening to be number 1. So he's into my top 10 now, and we'll see if he gets any higher by the time it's all said and done.
I,
And Eman Ori,
I was
we
going to say
talked
real
about.
quick,
Yeah.
according to you, is there a possibility that Membo is the number 1 offensive tackle taken in this draft? Because I see a lot of people saying, my Jets could take him at number 7. And I highly doubt Will Campbell's going above 7. It's very unlikely. Maybe the Patriots, maybe the Jaguars, but we're starting to see possibilities where there could be a Travis Hunter available at 4, right? For the Patriots. So he's not going there. The Jaguars most likely going Mason on the defensive side of the ball. So most likely not going there. So is there a possibility that Armand is the first guy off the board?
If they can, if a team believes he can translate to a left tackle, and even if he stays at right tackle, I think there is a possibility because the arm length came in so short on Will Campbell, and it has not really been done before at a high level. With the arm lengths he had was like 34, I think, was where that number was starting at. Let's see,
It's 34 and like
his
5/8 or something like that.
34 and 5/8. Yeah,
Something close to that.
32 and 5/8.
32. Oh, geez.
Well, yeah, so yeah, that was I think a big blow of like his real draft stock and what's pushing Membo up there. And I think there is a real possibility. Right now, I still say, as of this, today, Will Campbell, still think, it seems like the Patriots are really high on him at 4. We'll see what happens there if they pull that trigger. But, if Travis Hunter falls to him at 4, it's a real conversation with what that team really needs. They need offensive line help, but they also need, a guy like Travis Hunter on offense and on defense that can be, an athlete. But still, it's going to be close, and we'll see. But I like Mimbo
All right.
and what he's been doing lately.
Yep. So let's get into these next 3 defensive players. Nick Emanwari, obviously a big jump. Same as Jihad Campbell, most likely. And then Mason Graham, most likely a little drop off. Some people are saying he's a top 5 player. You have him at 8. What went into this ranking for you?
Yeah, so Nick Emanwari, again, we've already talked about him a little bit with the Malachi Starks conversation, but He's getting up there as, a guy that's going to be such a versatile weapon for a defense, being able to move all over the size, the speed matchups. I think I talked about him specifically being the guy that uh, they built in a lab to, defend guys like DK Metcalf. It might have been another, no, maybe in a corner, but either way, like he's in that conversation too. With the size speed matchups that he has is absolutely ridiculous. So he had to be one of the top players after the numbers he was producing at the combine. Mason Graham, I'm getting a little bit lower on, but I still think, he's still going to be in that conversation. I do think a team, if they see Mason Graham start to fall, will be interested in trading up. Now, which team decides to trade back, I don't really know for sure, but we'll see. I mean, because I could see either way. Like if he falls to 10, I think the Chicago Bears could take him. I think the Chicago Bears could also be a team, or if he starts slipping, maybe start moving up. And I think ESPN started mentioning that today, specifically with Mason Graham and the Bears. So we'll see what happens. And then Jihad Campbell, I think, with what he can do. I have him listed at linebacker one just because I want to keep him in that spot. But I think he can come off the edge as well and rush the passer. I think he has the chance as a full defensive, put together player, has the chance to be the most impactful defender in this year's class, even though I have Abdul Carter number one. So just what we saw from him and the buzz we're seeing out of Jihad Campbell, he had to start moving up on my list.
All right. So we've already talked about Will Campbell a little bit. So let's move on into
Hmm.
the top five. We'll just kind of go player by player here, real quick. Jalen Walker at number five, edge two, linebacker one, depending on where you have him.
Yeah.
Top five player in this class. I feel like we've been hearing about him a lot over these past few weeks. Everybody has him going to the Carolina Panthers at number eight. It hasn't changed at all. That would be a steal for the Panthers if he gets there at eight, it seems.
Yeah, and I think that the conversation with the Panthers is going to be him and Jihad Campbell. That both guys similar. Like, where are you going to put them? Are you going to have them off the edge? You're going to have them off ball linebacker, and it's going to be close in my opinion. I'm still penciling Jalen Walker to the Panthers, but Jihad Campbell's going to make a real conversation for it as well. But he juggled a lot for that Georgia defense in terms of what he was asked to do, playing both positions pretty much, and I still like what I saw. And to me, I mean, both programs have produced insane talent on the defensive side of the ball. So you're wondering which one's going to be the best in the class. I'm still rolling with Jalen Walker just because I've been on him since day one. And as much as Jihad Campbell's making a push right now, I cannot just do it yet and put him above Jalen Walker. So still got him just right above him.
All right, now take out Travis Hunter from the equation. The best two skill position players in this class, pure skill offensive position. Ashton Genty, your highlight player at number four. Tyler Warren, tight end one at number three. This is
Hmm.
high for these positions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's very high for a tight end to be at number three in the entire draft class. I mean, I can tell you I've got them very, very high as well. Why this high?
Yeah, and it's crazy. I think before I had uh like if I would have made this list a week ago, I might have had Ashton Jeanty above Tyler Warren, might have had Tyler Warren potentially out of the top five. But it's the push he's getting right now is, noteworthy. And we need to take really strong note of it because it was a wonder if, the first 10 off the board goes to the Colts and is it Colson Loveland or Tyler Warren? Who are they going to prefer? But he's getting a lot of these, links of these teams in the top 10 right now just because of the plug and play he has as a complete offensive weapon. I talked about, the blocking he can have on, as an inline blocker on like outside zones, the jump ball targets, the backfield usage out of Tyler Warren. He's just so complete, and every offensive coordinator is going to be in love with when you're watching his tape and the possibilities that he can have in that offense. He's just so, scheme versatile in that regard. But Ashton Jeanty is still, the best running back in this class and still going to be in that conversation with the Raiders at six, the Bears at 10, you know, the Dallas Cowboys at 13, I believe, 12 or 13. Still, strong fit for those teams as well. So I love Ashton Jeanty. The season he put together was one of the greatest in running back history at the college level. So, still putting him there in that top 50, top five is warranted. But Tyler Warren, man, I mean, the buzz he's getting is, isn't smoke. I think there's some fire to it, and we'll see what, comes of it in April.
All right. Now, everybody's top two players in this class, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter. I think we all know these are the top two, so they're not spoiling anything. It's Sunday. We're recording mine on Wednesday. I've got my top 50 penciled in. I'm still trying to figure out, who's going to be my number one, whether it's Travis Hunter, whether it's Abdul Carter. Why do you have Travis Hunter at number two?
Yeah, this was like so tough. I mean, Abdul Carter didn't do anything at the combine. Travis Hunter didn't do a lot at the combine. So we'll see what makes of it. But in my opinion, I mean, Travis Hunter, like I would love the player, but I think I'm scared. I would be scared to draft him because it seems like such a headache of what you're going to do with him, how you're going to handle his workload at one position or the other, how you're going to handle his contract in 3 to 4 years at one position or the other, and many aren't considering. But a freak of a player, what he can do on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, the motor this guy has, the amount of snaps he played at the college level was the guy never came off the field. It seemed like he was making plays on defense, making plays on offense, but it's Abdul Carter, the hate he's getting right now is insane because with everyone getting the inclination that Cam Ward's going number one, Myles Garrett re-signed or extended it, re-signed his extension with the Browns. The Giants are, battling back and forth in the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes of what they want to do at quarterback. So they might not go edge. They got Brian Burns. They got, Kayvon Thibodeau. The Patriots, it seems like they have more needs than a top tier edge rusher. Boom. We're talking about Abdul Carter as a fringe first top five guy in the first round now. So it's so weird because it was like, okay, he's the favorite to go number one, and now like he just continues to fall, continues to fall. I think I saw some Jets mocks this week that had Abdul Carter getting was
Don't
at
give me hope
seven.
like that. Don't give me. Don't even bring that up.
It's just it's the prospect,
Yeah.
I can't think of the word for it, but like when you start trying to be different, you get closer to draft time, you're like, okay, I'm going to be the guy that starts dropping Abdul Carter. Don't do that for the sake of trying to make your mock draft different. This guy, I still think he's the best talent in this year's class, and for good reason. And if teams want to just start passing on this guy for whatever reason, go ahead, let him tumble down the board because whatever team gets him is getting an impact edge rusher for years to come. That's going to be a dominant player. And as much as those guys are getting right now, no one's going to be trading for Trey Hendrickson at 30 years old and paying him $30 million a year when you can get Abdul Carter in the first round.
All right. So when I'm looking at your top 50 here, you obviously have Abdul Carter at one. You've got Jalen Walker at five. You've got Michael Williams at 14. You've got Shimmer Stewart at 19. Then all the way at 22, you've got James Pierce Jr., right?
Mhm.
And when we were talking about that, you said that James Pierce Jr. has the potential to be an even better pass rusher than Abdul Carter. Why is there such a big space between those two guys? And why are there players in between if you think that James Pierce Jr. could be the best pass rusher in this class?
Yeah, it's just that off the field, thing with James Pierce because, yes, I do believe that. Hang on, trying to get it pulled back up to my list.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe, he has that ability to be up there with Abdul Carter. And I think he, if he answers those, maturity questions, if he answers the drive questions, like those seem like such minuscule ways to be trying to knock on a prospect. If he has the skill set, he has all the transferable numbers, all of the transferable size, speed, burst, get off, all those things. Why are we not talking about this guy being a top pick? And yeah, I don't have him there on my list because, I like, Shamar Stewart's numbers, his, intangibles, and then Michael Williams, the same way. But I think once you start looking at, okay, at what point does the numbers matter more than the talent on the field? And that's a conversation I'm going to start having, in my own mental, as I'm looking at these edge rushers. And luckily, I'm just not in a position where, the teams that I'm covering and the teams I'm fans of are really in the market for like an impact edge rusher to where I'm having to like
Yep.
really deep dive on these guys. But that's the conversation. Numbers and like, the traits versus the talent on the field. And the talent on the field, James Pierce and Abdul Carter are, 1A and 1B. And if you go off the numbers and, projecting off their speed, their traits. There's a lot to like about Michael Williams and Shamar Stewart when the production just wasn't there,
All right. Well,
if that makes
that
sense.
that is Cole's top 50 players going into the NFL draft. Now, obviously, we've got a few weeks coming up. I mean, the draft is in a little bit over a month away, so there could be some changes. And, we'll talk about that as the weeks go on. But
Hmm.
this is what it is currently.
Yep.
So, mine will be coming out on Thursday. This will be out on Monday as you're listening. And we'll see what the differences are between the two. So, excited to see that. All right.
Yep. We'll see. There's definitely going to be some changes.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, then we will see you guys on Thursday for my top 50. Hope you enjoyed Cole's top 50, and we'll see you next time.